And as we get into federal politics, John McDonnell writes for us here on Flow News 24, and his articles are worth a read. And with the articles he places up, I voice them into this shift, and they're then available as podcasts for you if you find them interesting. This one is about the tech giants buckling in the face of a media code. Now, we as a media organisation have a radio service with licensing. We pay fees and so forth for radio licences and so on. But Google and Facebook are the big tech giants that have been using the news content that is made by broadcasters, and in the face of the federal government introducing legislation and debate on this topic today, that it would in the next fortnight put in legislation that would have multi-party support, and as a result that these tech giants would then have to pay for content to say 7 West or 9 Entertainment, or in the fact the Flow Broadcast Network, if we were lucky enough for the corporate people to actually pay us for the articles that we produce. And that becomes a very key question, because on Monday, Google reached an agreement with 7 West Media to pay $30 million for content. Wednesday, it's reportedly reached a similar deal with 9 Entertainment. Now, interestingly enough, Treasurer Morrison-Frydenberg says that they will continue to move towards the legislation despite media organisations like Google who have been making deals before the code has been law. And in a joint press release with the Communications Minister, Paul Fletcher, he said a central feature of the new code is that it encourages parties to undertake commercial negotiations outside the code. It is encouraging to see recent reports that news media businesses and digital platforms are now reaching commercial agreements against the backdrop of the code being introduced into Parliament, and that they're receiving the backing of the Senate's Economics Legislation Committee. That is effectively what the Senate had come up with. This was an answer to a lot of the problems of having, say, Australian journalists who are paid and are given the jobs that they have. Then their work is then created, but then others at an international level use that work without payment. This gets back to things like, say, radio stations like us. When we play music, we have to pay the artists for playing that music. The same way, if we write stories, then as a media agency, then if another agency like, say, Google, or in the case of Facebook, use that, then they would be obliged to pay for that content. Google's initial reaction to the media code was to threaten to pull out of Australia. It subsequently backtracked and suggested that media companies could become participants in its news showcase. Under this arrangement, media companies would get payments similar to ones that they would receive under the code, but Google would avoid setting the precedent by paying for content displayed in searches, writes John McDonnell. The tech platform continues to negotiate separate deals with many of the large media companies. We'll wait and see how this goes through the Australian Communication and Media Authority. But one would suggest that there is going to be bipartisan support for this across the House. The tech giants did have a small win when the government agreed to delete the provision requiring them to give media companies 14 days notice of any change to their algorithms. Yes, I think that's one that is going to be up for interest, because that's one that catches out a lot of folk, isn't it? And the algorithms seem to pick and choose what is available and what gets shared, and even if it's paid shared, whether you're allowed to share some sorts of content. The old free speech argument will come up again, and I'm sure that the government thinks it's solved a problem here with the tech giants. It may need to solve a problem with its freedom of speech laws in this country.